I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us a guest that, when he's on, it's just a real treat. He does something called predictive linguistics, and he goes out and he collects literally billions of pieces of information and data over the internet spectrum, and then he analyzes it and comes up with some kind of predictions, some sort of roadmap of where the chatter and where things are going in the world. And he is Clif High. Clif High from halfpasthuman.com. Clif, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. It's always a treat when you're on.
Thank you much, Greg. It's always fun.
Okay, so I'm going to start at the end of your report. You sell this thing for dirt. It's like $15 for it. It's 30 single-spaced pages, and we'll talk more about that at the end of the interview. But you end it with a conclusion. I don't want to give away your whole conclusion, but you do say that 2017 is going to be a deeply disturbing year. Why do you say 2017 is going to be a deeply disturbing year?
Because at the core of our work, we follow emotional trends. And in order to examine emotional trends, we examine them in a very long distance time frame. And what occurred in 2016 with the election was not merely an election cycle of 4 years, nor even the continuation of the Obama regime 12-year kind of a thing. Really, what it represented was the culmination of a push within the deep state towards centralization. And it was a centralization at a global level. So, for instance, we find that Hillary Clinton received money from Angela Merkel, from the head of the ruling parties in Sweden, Norway, all of these kind of places for her campaign. And if you look at it in a very broad sense, what we see is two parts of the deep state at war with each other. Our mutual friend, Catherine Austin Fitts, made a statement way back when that the only way Trump could win would be if the intelligence community decided that he would win. And I agree with that statement up to a certain point. And really what I think it represents is that there was Trump won because of the winning of a particular faction within the deep state. And let's just assume it's split into two. That may not be the case, but let's just assume that at the moment. 2017 is going to be a deeply disturbing year because the faction that won in placing Trump to power also defeated the other faction, which has been on a roll for, well, ever since the McCarthy era.
Goes back that far.
Correct.
Wow,
this push for centralization, for purification of the control mechanism, basically was all Nazi infiltration in the United States at the end of World War II. Not German, but Nazi, National Socialist German Workers' Party.
Yeah, Operation Paperclip kind of helped that along too.
Correct. And thousands, tens of thousands came in, infiltrated the structure of the United States, less so Russia, etc. And so we see a push towards a centralization of government that had the Clinton faction won would have continued until we were basically at the point of reaching a Hitler type of a nexus where banking and political power and military power were all centrally joined. Now, that was not a native part of the German political structure before the war. Germany, by the way, in case people don't know, used to be the most bizarre place in the sense that the army had its own munitions, it had its own banks, the Navy had its own banks, they had their own factories to build their munitions and so on. And in Germany, basically, they all went their own way and were always scrapping with each other. And then came Hitler and the push for centralization, which continued in the United States from McCarthy onward. So here we are at a point now where that faction has been defeated. 70 plus years of central memeing, directing the global narrative a particular way, is gone, is crashed. We're in a meme or narrative vacuum at the moment. The winning faction that pushed Trump into power has yet to bring its narrative out and start promulgating it through any of the sources. There's some hints of things that are coming here and there. And because we have those hints, I think that what's going to happen this year is that everyone at a core level within the United States populace is going to be faced with a reexamination of what we think we know is true. And this will extend so far back in history that if you want to spend the next 2 or 3 years you'll be able to just sit and read and look at what's really happening in terms of the history coming out and be totally absorbed in it, simply because the faction that has won is not opposed to the general population learning the truth in terms of recent history and distant history. Unlike the group that would have continued into power, that Obama represented, that Hillary would have represented, etc. That group was opposed to humans knowing anything at all about our current situation on this planet, and they were opposed to us knowing anything about the truth of our real origins. So the Hillary Clinton group was represented global warming, and it represented carbon credits and all of this kind of thing. And the Trump group represents that part of the deep state that knows we have to get real about dealing with an ice age. So there's all sorts of levels that are going to be broken up here in terms of what we thought was true as the legacy media meme and its narrative dies along with the power structure that had supported it. And this is not a situation that many people had envisioned, such as all the people that were saying that Trump would be assassinated, that the CIA couldn't allow him to take office, and so on. They had real good reasons for saying that, but what they failed to grasp was that the CIA is not a monolithic sort of a culture, so much as it is, along with all of the other parts of the deep state, faction A versus faction B. And that war is broken out over 2016, and at this point seems somewhat settled in the sense there has been a definitive win from faction B, and they seem to be going through the appropriate task of cleaning up and consolidating their victory. That, I think, is going to lead to a huge amount of what our mutual friend Bill Holter calls truth bombs.
This is the reason why he first went to the CIA. His first stop was to the CIA to consolidate that power around him. And there's no doubt he has the Pentagon behind him. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Will you agree with that?
I don't see it as monolithic, so I don't think that the Pentagon is it can be covered by a single label. I think there's faction A in that group and there's faction B in that group. I think he's one faction B, and they have to basically, as in any kind of a power struggle like this, they have to watch out for their back during this period of transition so that they're not knifed in the back and there isn't that kind of action that goes on. And then they have to root out those former enemies that can't be co-opted or converted and remove them from positions of power. So I suspect that will go on for some period of time. Whether we're witness to it as the citizens of the country paying for it all, I don't know that we'll see much of that. But some of it is working its way out in the media as we speak. Now, what's going to be really interesting is the former legacy media, the propaganda arm of the losing side, faction A, probably has real interests in telling us about a lot of these things, especially the screw-ups from their position that faction B is going to make. So it may actually lead to something of an information sniping, if you will, between the two factions, which from my viewpoint would be quite interesting because in those kinds of exchanges, the populace gets a real view of who has power and where the power used to be and what actually went on.
I will tell you that you said that there was a lot of chatter on the internet about Donald Trump's he's not going to be inaugurated, they're going to stop him and all that. You came on and said no, we don't get that in our data sets. He's going to be inaugurated, he's going to get on. Now they're talking about removing him from office, assassination, more stuff. Are you seeing any of that in your data sets in the future? They're going to be able to remove him from office?
No, we don't have any of that. There appears to be a very large or a period, let me put it this way, a period that will extend from some point in March through May of what you and I might think of as chaos politically in the language coming out of the power centers in the East Coast. But the language that's coming out, Trump and the administration are still basically pains in the ass to the losing side. And so therefore, it's not the kind of chaos that would happen if he was assassinated. So in other words, it's not an echo of the Reagan period, where just a couple of months into Reagan's term, they attempted to take him out and move George Bush in, and it didn't quite work. we don't have those kinds of linguistic temporal echoes. Instead, we have something that's much more akin to the language that you can find even to today about Teddy Roosevelt's first year in office, with the chaos, the attacks on the trust, their attempt to fight back, that kind of a more open political battle.
Then what about, let's get right into the global cooling that you talked about. So we're not heading towards global warming. We're heading for global cooling, and the poles are going to shift off of. I think you told me the last time. The ice is going to kind of move off of Antarctica and reveal that there's a lot more history down there than what anybody would like to admit to. Is that what's going to happen?
Correct.
We're going to get global cooling and a big reveal at the same time.
Correct. The reveal is sort of a side effect of the relocation of the magnetic poles, and that's the magnetic poles' influence on these vortices that bring down very cold temperatures from space. The Earth can be thought of as a sphere that uses air currents to try and even up the heating all around it. And so the way it does this is to try, or what it's trying to do is to react to these cold spots on each pole. Here in the USA population, we're told by mainstream media that the Arctic is losing ice, and I even run into, in my daily movements and stuff, people who take that to be factual when it's not the case. The mainstream propaganda media has been lying about the weather conditions for decades because that was part of their control mechanism. And they've gotten it to the point where a number of people, quite legitimately, because they've been lied to basically all their lives, believe that and we're talking millennial generation here, they believe their lives are going to be extremely short because they think that Donald Trump has won and he's not going to somehow pull a magic wand out of his bag the way that Hillary would have to stop global warming. Now, they're of the opinion that their lives will be cut down to less than 12 or 15 years because they think in that period of time we're going to flop over into Venus and everybody will choke and die on the carbon dioxide. And it's because
totally not true.
Totally not true. There's been higher levels of carbon dioxide on this planet. You can find records that go back to 440 parts per million. That's much higher than we're dealing with at this point. There's no relationship to carbon dioxide directly causing any of the heat. In fact, carbon dioxide rises as the planet is already moving into a cooling condition. You can find these facts all over the place. Plus, there's another aspect of this. We have maps in our current possession now, and you can find these on the internet that show Antarctica ice-free, and it could have been ice-free as little as 13,000 years ago, but certainly because of the nature of the maps was ice-free 70,000 years ago or less. So if you're telling me that the ice mass that's 2 miles or 3 miles high on Antarctica is 3 million years old, you're quite mistaken. Very mistaken, because we have maps that prove otherwise. And these maps could not have come down 3 million years if we assumed that some race back there had made the map and had left it for us to copy and recopy and recopy and recopy. We know what that leads to, and it does not lead to the pristine state of map that we have now from several different sources showing Antarctica ice-free, as little as I say, perhaps as little as 13 to 14,000 years ago. If that is the case, then assuming that 3 miles thick of ice cores get you back 3 million years is absolutely erroneous. And not only is it erroneous, it is a step backward because it's going to lead you into some very wrong thinking. What you think took 800,000 years took 8 years because of the disparity in your level of calculations based on your thinking in terms of its length of its period in time. And so we're looking at ice age conditions that may have settled in on Antarctica in the course of a single decade. This would lead, as many have rightly concluded, to much of the language that we find in Plato about Atlantis and how it became inundated and covered with water. And here we find all kinds of conditions now occurring as it melts. It's revealing that much of the stuff in Antarctica that we're finding was basically flash frozen, and so was frozen in place, unable to move and get out and escape. And so just like the flash freezing incidents that we're having now, in which whole herds of elk are frozen in the course of a minute, and just like the historical records of bison that we find chewing on buttercups that were flash frozen in mid-chew, and even the bacteria killed in their stomach, not yet digesting the contents of that stomach, we now can say that, well, none of these time calculations are accurate. And so here, this is actually kind of good for me at a very personal level. This the winning of faction B means that all us woo-woo guys can come on out and speak of these things in a very factual manner without having to go and provide mountains of evidence to prove our opinion on these. Because a lot of the stuff I'll be speaking of is not accepted by the mainstream media. In fact, they ridicule it, such as UFOs, or the UAPs, the unidentified aerial phenomena that we all live with, and some of us daily. All of these kind of things are factual parts of our reality that are not being included in our thinking, and therefore we are in the miserable state of affairs that we are now. And I contend that if we just simply faced reality in a factual way, a lot of people's opinions about some of the stuff would change. Our emotional attachment to these opinions would change, and we'd be a lot more harmonious with each other and with that reality going forward. But we can't do it if we're going to start, or if we keep living on these lies of the manipulated money, manipulated history, not acknowledging the reality that's staring us in the face.
Do you think that the Trump administration, I will call them, Faction B that won, do you think that they're going to truth bomb us into, okay, we got some fake money, we have all this debt we're not going to pay? Trump is going to, I think, is going to reorganize the country. That's what Bill Holter says. He'll be presiding over a bankruptcy, reorganization, what have you. Is that reason why you're getting feedback that gold and silver and Bitcoin are all going to be on a tear, especially silver going way up?
I would agree with that at a very fundamental level, that the advent of Faction B signals the breakdown of the manipulation and the power base that allowed that manipulation to occur. When it'll happen, I don't know, but I think that the truth bombs will cause the natural human reaction to take place. And that natural human reaction in this case is going to be the shift of wealth out of disappearing paper assets and into what we can call hard and harder ethereal assets like Bitcoin.
And do you think silver, you've written a lot about silver, and Bix Will came on and said, well, the gold is all there, basically. We didn't use it up. But we used up the silver. Is that why you're getting feedback where you're getting 600-ounce silver? Will you talk about 600-ounce silver?
We've had that since 2003, as part of the death of the dollar. That was a coincidence in 2003, mind you. Bear in mind, we don't get very much in the way of numeracy. Numbers just don't go through in our processing. When they do, they're rather rare. And I talked about this back in 2003. I said there was a juxtaposition between 20,000 on the Dow, $600 an ounce silver. And that was really all I had back then, because it was long-term data. You don't get a lot of details. As we get closer to the event, we get more shorter-term data. And then as you get closer, even still, you get what we call immediacy data. So you get a lot more details. And that's really what we're getting into, is a situation here where there's going to be two forces that are working on silver. The degradation of the physical or of the emotional confidence in paper money and in its digital representation. So we're going to have forces pushing our emotional attachment to the existing system away. And then and that would naturally move us towards more ancient forms of money that have held their value, such as silver and gold. And silver's been money longer than gold, and has been money wider in the sense that more people have used silver in daily transactions than ever have used gold. Gold was much more of a storehouse of wealth for entire states and nations, whereas like in the Roman Empire, people used the silver denarius. They weren't really moving much gold between them. And then there's this other aspect of it that is quite staggering. And we've had hints of that for perhaps the last 18 months or so in our data, without really being able to recognize what was shaping up that long ago. But this other aspect of it is what we're now calling hyper-technology. And that is to say that we're in an innovation wave that's going to take off now that the Faction A has lost. and the free floating of information will start to occur. The information is going to be combined from one person to another to create new ideas. And you can see how it happens. Some kid gets a good idea. He comes up with a prototype. He shows it on the internet for bragging rights. And the next thing you know, there's 9 or 10 variants of it. And people start combining that with something else. And so it goes. That kind of an innovation wave is just literally building under our feet. And some of the technologies that will be involved in that in our data sets have silver at a real key level. And so because of its unique properties and transmission of electricity. And so there's the pressure not only on silver from a monetary viewpoint, but also from a technical viewpoint. And indeed, it gets so far in our data sets that by 2022, the data refers to silver as being too precious to use as money.
Wow.
That we need it too much in our technology to consider using it as money. It's much more valuable than that, if you can imagine such a state, because the technology itself is much more valuable than money. And you can see how this could occur, okay? Because imagine the situation where you had 100 ounces of silver, and you had a device that required that use of exactly that 100 ounces of silver. But this kind of a device would pay off in a way that 100 ounces of silver in and of itself could never do, even if you'd converted it and used it to buy stuff, because maybe this device is some form of a low raw material input replicator that might provide food for 30 years, or, might be something like a very high-end 3D printer that can provide robotic arms for 30 years. And so there's going to be a trade-off in everybody's mind at the commercial level of, boy, this silver is expensive, but yeah, that gadget that we're going to build is going to be really cool, that kind of thing.
And then maybe we're talking about money. You got things in your data sets, and there's no way we can get to all this, folks. So you're just getting kind of a brush over of this report. It's really long and very detailed. What I picked out was, a dollar crash and a bond crash. Can you talk about the dollar crash and a bond crash and hyperinflation?
Yeah, the data sets have this period from March to May being politically and economically chaotic in terms of the language. Within that language, we have some sets about, we've had stuff going for months about bonds and how the bonds are just going to basically be vomited out of institutions for poor performance and for being basically a drag on them in an asset class. And so they're going to want to get rid of the bonds. That's basically what the data sets have said for us.
Just so you know, there's some real world stuff here from last week. Was in Europe, the bond market in Europe had the worst January in history. In Europe, the worst in history.
And we've seen for years that it would be coming out of Europe before it hit the U.S., and that it's all going to really spring from the Italian banks that had been identified in our reports maybe even 5 years back. But getting back to the bonds for a minute, the data sets have this period that shows not a big culmination or anything, but like, let's say, a near-term peak of emotional activity relative to bonds that hits us in May as a result of the political chaos that's going to be there from March through May, not only within the United States population, but also throughout a lot of the Western developed world, including down into Australia. The data has all of these sets joined up relative to bonds, such that that the situation looks so dire to the central banks that their response will be rolled out in June, and it's a response to the previous 3 or 4 months building up all of this emotional and political pressure on them, and that's why we get the hyperinflation, is because the bond vigilantes have come out. We've got rising rates. The central bank is caught between a rock and a hard place. They don't know whether to raise rates and chase the bond vigilantes or to try and swamp them with easing and a huge amount of quantitative easing. And that's what our data suggests that the federal bank does, is that it attempts to take that approach, which sets us up for the problems in fall.
And when you say sets up for the fall, so we get some pretty heavy inflation starting in March through May. And when you say sets us up for the problems that fall, is that the big one that we've been hearing about for several years from many people that the manipulation has put off? I mean, it's unbelievable fraud, manipulating gold, silver, forex, interest rates, mortgages, futures, the stock market, everything has been manipulated. So you're saying that when you say it sets us up for what's coming in the fall, what is coming in the fall?
I don't know if we would call it the big one because there's this big underlying problem with okay, in our descriptions, let's assume that we know that by the time we get to fall, the bond markets are basically shuddering old men peeing on themselves, okay, just sitting there not doing anything. And so we'll be talking about the only thing still moving at that point, which is the shares or equities markets, which are based on algorithms and so on and not really retail trade. And so they don't really represent a market. But those numbers, according to our data sets, are going to be quite high in the sense that we may be looking at huge amounts of hyperinflation within the equities market in the U.S., such that we have a 50,000 Dow or much higher. Now, what happens in fall is not, in my opinion.
Hold on, just 1 minute. I'm going to. What happens in the fall, in my opinion? Hold on. I just want to ask you one question about: would the dollar be hyperinflating? Would gold be hyperinflating? Would silver be hyperinflating along with the stock market?
The silver and gold will be hyperinflating. Our data does not show the dollar doing that. It shows the dollar being worth less and less and less as we go through from March through May, and I don't understand the mechanisms myself. That's just what we have in the way of a forecast from the data sets. But we have silver, gold, and Bitcoin rising very rapidly during this period of hyperinflation. And in fact, Bitcoin will signal a lot of this over these next few days. We expect by the time that this is seen, one of those dates, February 3rd, will have been passed, and we'll be just getting into the February 5th, and then the 10th. And we'll see temporal markers, we think, on these days that will be able to be echoed later on in the year before going into our fall period.
Okay, and then now back to the fall. Now, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You said, in my opinion, what's going to be happening in the fall is?
We may indeed see a paper equities crash, okay, a debt equities crash. But see, here's what we've got for fall. We've got this crises that occurs in the regional banking structure, such that one of its symptoms, not a cause, not even its main effect, but one of its symptoms is going to be a very large economic impact for anybody that is involved in student loans, either receiving them, processing them, being paid by them, or issuing them. Okay, so that whole student loan structure, if you will, that is a very large component of our economy and is also the single largest asset that we have on the books for the federal government, is showing up as being very negatively impacted by the events that are going to occur over summer and into fall. So from that point on, we have much larger problems, in my opinion, than the markets per se. But the markets are going to present a very giant problem that I don't know if we'll actually have the political will to tackle it this year. But one of the things that's coming out within our data sets about the faction B winning is that we're going to address the issue at some point here of the fraud within the markets themselves. So it's meaningless that the Dow is at 50,000 or 20,000 as it is today if, for instance, you know that there's 9 times, every day we trade 9 times the amount of stock that actually exists on the planet. And so we've super infinitely hypothecated all of this, and no one knows who owns anything. And
that's big. That's big.
And exactly. See, and that aspect of it has to be dealt with. So we've got some very long-term data sets for 2018 that talk about the breakdown of things to the point that the trading mechanism of the digital platforms is shut down while people try and reconcile and figure out what they're going to do for ownership. And that is coincident with the huge rise in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a publicly processed ledger that prevents fraud. And so the blockchain model is probably what these people will go to some point thereafter. But it also means at that stage that all of these numbers are gone because we have to resolve down to reality.
And you say hypothecated. In other words, there are many owners for the same share. Just like Bill Holter says, people are going to find out there are many owners for the same bar, the same ounce of gold, the same bar, the same ounce of silver. There are many owners for that. And if you don't hold it in
I
your
would
hand.
Prefer to put it another way.
Okay, go ahead.
There's one owner, and that is the person that actually controls it. So in the case of the shares, there's one owner, which I think is a Rothschild company. I can't think of the name of it.
Company.
Correct. That's the outfit. Okay. Everybody else has a claim, and that's as far as it goes. So they might as well have an insurance claim, and if the insurance company goes out of business, you don't get paid.
Oh,
and so
boy.
that's what's going on. So think of it not as ownership, because that implies that you will eventually get some level of remuneration or the actual goods or something,
A piece
and
of
that
it.
will never occur.
Oh my gosh! We're talking about what you're talking about is a total default reset, start over, and that's what Donald Trump's going to be overseeing. That's what Bill Holter has said. He'll be overseeing a bankruptcy. You think that we're going to get in your data sets a big fat default in the markets, in the debt markets, in the stock markets, a big fat default?
Correct, but that's really just a symptom. That's a side effect of the real bankruptcy, and the bankruptcy that has to be presided over, in my opinion, is this moral, ethical, informational bankruptcy that is at the core of everything. The 70 years of secrecy about the woo-woo world of, reverse engineered UFOs, the hidden bases and stuff in Antarctica, all of this kind of stuff has to come on out. We need to shake ourselves off because we've been deluded so long, look at reality, and then decide what we're going to do. So it's my contention that if the disaffected youth of the millennial age were actually presented with a real world view of what's going on, that they would be quite enthusiastic about the potential challenges that are there waiting for them, and things that they're able to do, and that they're reacting the way they are now because of the very miserable vision that they've been given of what their potential lives are going to be involved with and are going to be about. Many of them are actually convinced that they will be dead in 12 years due to us going into a Venus kind of condition. And they may well yet be dead in 12 years if we don't get our act together here and start growing food indoors and worrying about that. We've had massive amounts of crop failures this year. Next year is going to be so bad that we'll actually have to take notice as a species. We've had new glaciers that are forming, some of them even up here in my neck of the woods in the crater of St. Helens. And so these new glaciers are going to form rapidly. They're going to scare us over these next couple of years as we realize that, we've flipped into the Ice Age component. We'd better get real about this.
And you, let's just shortly on Antarctica. I had Steve Quayle on, who was fascinating. He wrote a couple of books on this. And you think we're going to find out, because we really don't know much about what happened before the flood. Even in the Bible, we just don't know. We know there's let there be light, then all of a sudden there's a lot of people that lived a long time, and boom, Noah, the flood, which is a lot of scientific evidence for that. We don't know what happened. And one of the reveals in Antarctica is that we're going to find out that history is a whole lot more complex and a whole lot more deeper than what anybody would like to admit to you before the flood. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. We're probably going to find that there may have been 100,000 pyramids on this planet, but certainly in the tens of thousands. We're going to find pyramids in Alaska that will almost rival those that are in Australia. And the ones in Australia are almost as big as the ones in Antarctica. And the ones in Antarctica are 5 and 6 and 7 times larger than what we find in Giza, our big, claim to fame pyramids, right? And so we're going to see that the reality of this planet is not as we've been told, and that this understanding is the prize. It's the goal that Faction A and Faction B have been fighting over for all of these years. Now, I exist in a woo-woo world where there's probabilities, potentials, and developing reality. And in that woo-woo world, I'm open to the probabilities and potentials that are not necessarily discussed or validated by mainstream media or even legacy thinking. Let's just put it that way. And so I examine things, and I can put them in my worldview and examine them and then set them aside or integrate them if they fit. And we're going to all be forced to do this kind of mental exercise as we go forward over this next year. And a lot of this stuff starts coming on out because everything we've been told, even down to the level of how chemistry works, is going to turn out to be inaccurate, at best, a superficial sketch for For Dummies book kind of an approach, right?
Right.
And so that approach to how we live has to change relative to the developing reality of what's coming out of Antarctica. So, for instance, we are able now to do searches just on the CIA documents that they released the other day, and just go and do that. If you get on the CIA site, bear in mind they're leaving cookies on your PC while you're doing this, but go and search for Antarctica and see the references you find there. Search out some of the names that you find there, and you'll find that some of them lead you back to military documents that can be obtained, some of which are movies from the films made, Super 8 films made from the 70s of freestanding water in Antarctica, a mountain range in Antarctica that the first peak they ran into was twice the size of Mount Rainier and St. Helens combined, and it's 100% coal. It doesn't even have dirt on it. You don't even have to scrape the dirt off to get at the coal. And the estimation was we could convert every machine on the planet, all of humanity, in the 70s at that population level. We could convert all of the machines on the planet to run on coal, and that one mountain alone would provide us 200 years of coal energy. So, and within those same films are illusions and background discussions you can hear going on that relate to findings of very strategic rare earth minerals in some appreciable quantities that are easy to get at. So Antarctica is not, as we've had it described to us, as a big ice block. And it hasn't been that way for the last 30 or 40 years. This is another aspect of the secrecy that has to change. We talk about identity politics and all the problems there, and this is really what I think of as birthright politics. If you're born on this planet, you have a right to share in its resources, and that begins with knowing what other people know about those resources. So very interesting.
And it could be quite. It could be quite economically a boom. We could get some good stuff
Correct.
coming out. There's some hope here, right?
Oh, correct. I see this as actually we have this. Okay, now here's where we're going to get into some spookiness. Okay, because it is feasible that, given the nature of my work, I could engender what's known as a self-fulfilling prophecy or a self-cyclic linguistic loop. So I could say stuff here that would get someone else to say stuff, which would actually cause somebody to have an idea, and then that idea would percolate out, and it would be manifesting what I had discussed. I do not believe that that is the case. I think that what I'm going to describe here has already occurred to people, and in fact is part of a plan. So I'll say that in my recent report in February, I discussed this thing that we're calling Strategy 3. Now, that's just my dramatic name for it, okay? But what it is like a third force idea that's going to, in my opinion, or actually has already occurred to somebody within the faction B, and that this strategy is to basically use revelations and secrets revealed and stuff as a psychological weapon to disrupt the remnants of faction A, and that it will occur to the people, or has already occurred, and they'll implement this as we get into this period of chaos and political problems in March through May. And when you think about it, it's a good strategy, because if you're rioting, and your main point of rioting is because you're afraid you're going to be dead in 12 years because the evil ones are in control and they won't recognize or refuse to recognize or are too stupid to recognize global warming is going to fry you. Well, then to suddenly find out that, the CIA and all these other people are in fact working diligently to harden everything against the Ice Age, and then all this other stuff coming on out from secrets revealed aspect of it, not being released by your mainstream media, but percolating up in the media you actually sort of trust. This is going to give you a different view on things, and you're going to have to think, I'm out here getting my head kicked for $10 an hour that George Soros is paying me, but not really doing that. I'm taking the $10 an hour to continue my fight against the evil ones because they're going to doom me to global warming, which isn't. So that kind of this in our data set shows this as being a game changer, that it will occur or has occurred to these people to use hidden truths as a way of literally coming along and yanking the rug out from under other people's paradigms.
And thus
once you're in that state of paradigm disruption, then anything is possible, including acquiescing to the generalized trend of your friends getting all hyped up about the idea of discovering ancient civilizations and digging out technology and all the cool stuff you've seen all your life in TV that's never materialized, et cetera, et cetera.
And one last thing, one of the things you brought up, we're going to end it with this, is narrative wars. I used to be in the mainstream media. I am not. I'm in the alternative media now. You would never get on CNN. You would never get on MSNBC. They'd think you were a kook. I do not. But is the mainstream media, the legacy propaganda media, which they're a bunch of liars, they're losing, right? In your data sets, they are losing. Is that correct, or are they winning?
They're quite correct. They have lost. The legacy media is a symptom of the faction A, and the power structure that allowed the legacy media to stomp all over everyone has been removed. And so we'll see them fade away fairly rapidly.
And this is why Donald Trump is saying, CNN's fake news. He's branding them as fake news.
Correct. And pretty soon you'll see that they won't have the economic wherewithal to continue. And a lot of the people that used to work for them will come on out and start truth-telling in the sense that, I was, told not to talk about this, et cetera, et cetera. And we see this, the fake news meme here within CNN and what I'm telling you is being supported by the economic issues going on in the background. So if you watch what CNN has done relative to certain joint ventures, they're starting to throttle back on the amount of money they're putting into them. And there's discussions now about maybe having to sell CNN in order for the Time Warner deal to go through. So you get to some very interesting conclusions about how rapidly this will occur. But in our data sets, the period of time when we have the major have to deal with the reality of the shares market being polluted by the infinite hypothecation claims, that kind of thing in 2018. At that point, there's not a what we would think of as a mainstream media. You got millions of alternative media voices the way it was in the 1800s, which is the way it should be.
You're saying that in general, because people ask me all the time, and I just want to get your take on this. They say, I owe money on my house. Should I pay off my house, or should I? And I'm telling people, this is what I say. Tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, let me have it. I say, listen, what we're going into, you better own it. You better own your car title, own your house title. You better have your stuff, and you have clear title to your stuff. Because anything that is a third party, and Bix Weir brought this up, I'd sell anything that has a third party between you and your stuff. Is that a reasonable thing, or is that crazy time? Hide under a rock stuff.
That's sort of like legacy media thinking, if you don't mind my saying so, because here's the deal. Bix is correct. Don't have any third party between you and your Bitcoin. Don't have any third party between you and your silver or your gold. But insofar as houses and this kind of thing, at this particular point in time, with depreciating money and the idea that money may go hyper inflated fairly quick, there's a lot of arguments to be made that you're wrong, Greg, that the thing to do would be to maximize your level of debt at the moment and do as the power elite are doing and convert as much of that debt to hard assets that are going to appreciate if, and this is the caveat, if you can afford to service that debt in the period of time it takes this thing to fall apart. So if it took you a couple of years, if you could pay that debt off for a couple of years, it may make sense to take debt and do things like buy silver now and wait for silver appreciation, knowing it's not going to be instant, and knowing that and also knowing as you go along that you're going to be paying that silver off in cheaper dollars as long as you don't have to earn those dollars. There's the rub.
Yeah,
So if you're,
that's right. Having to pay the nut. That's the rub.
right. And if you have to if you have to trade your hours of life for that to pay off the nut, you're not really getting ahead that way, right? You'll be scraping by during this period of time. If you have the wherewithal to pay your house off now, I could say that there's an argument to be made that it may make more sense to not do so, to set this up such that you can continue to make the payments and use that bulk that would pay the house off to purchase an asset that will rise, whereas the house is not going to. So paying your house off now, when its value is nominally $200,000 now, is okay if you're going to sell it now. If you're going to think of selling it a year from now under those conditions, if you can sell a year from now, the idea that you'd get $200,000 for it is unlikely given our current state. Or you may get $500,000 or $6 million for it, but that $6 million will get you, 2 lattes and a bagel.
Yeah, that's one of the things I said. You don't know what your payment stream is going to be. You don't know if you're going to have
Correct.
access to your money. You don't know if your payment stream is going to be interrupted. So I say the sure thing is own your stuff. And that's the sure thing. May not be the smartest thing, but it's the sure thing. But thank you for your input on that. Thank you.
And that would actually speak to the fear of someone coming and taking your stuff away from you, which is a valid fear. And so I personally, by the way, paid my house off in 2010 because I was tired of dealing with the bank. But get this, I have yet to receive a deed from Chase. And every time I hassle the bank or hassle the county or any of this, I'm told it's in the process. But because the MERS, the
Mortgage Electronic Registry System,
because that was so screwed up, will I ever receive a deed? And if that's the case, what's the point of having paid off Chase?
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, halfpasthuman.com is the website. Your latest report called Stoke It, and it's talking about a fire. When you have a fire, you stoke it. It's the latest report on the website. You also have a bonus report on there for $15. Tell me about that.
The bonus report is called Riding the Dragon, and it's focused very much specifically on Bitcoin, silver, and gold, and is focused on that for a period of time from actually last month all the way through to March of next year.
And listen, I read on your site, and I love this, and I don't get any, you pay me nothing for this. I just have you on because you're great, and I think you're very interesting. You've been right a lot, And so anyway, but on your website, it says, if you don't like your report for any reason, you could just, you contact me, and we'll give you your money back, no questions asked. And it's a one-time deal.
That's correct.
Oh,
that's
okay.
Correct.
All right. Well, how can you lose with that? I mean, if you're nefarious, or if you're a weasel, you'd go read the report and do that. But most people wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. I would keep.
I don't think very many of the people that would watch your show would do that, Greg. I don't run that much of a risk, and there are a lot of people that I present disturbing information to, and I don't want to burden their minds by thinking that they also had to pay for it and it disturbed them. So I'm happy to give them a refund.
But the kind of report that you have, I mean, I would have to. I got to tell you, I mean, and you write very clearly and very plainly. You don't write in huge, crazy, ununderstandable sentences and thought patterns. You write very clearly, but you have to read that a couple of times. I mean,
it's dense material, very dense.
Very dense. You don't just. It's like you look at it, and you go, wait a minute, let me go back to that. And I went through it for about 2 hours, and I didn't get all of it. I mean, I didn't near.
Yeah, I get that a lot. People say, well, I've got to go read it tomorrow. Yeah.
I'm not that smart, but I'm not that dumb either. And I mean, it was something. Anyway, Clif High, halfpasthuman.com. All the links for you YouTubers. Well, if you go up to the right through, it'll show going back to the to the page where this is on usawatchdog.com. Look in the after the interview section. You'll just scroll down. You'll find his report. Very simple. Clif High, thanks for enlightening us on usawatchdog.com.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Love it.